Welcome to this week's Property Elite podcast. Stay tuned each week for industry hot topics, market updates, and new RICS guidance.
Hi everyone, I'm here with Katie and Karl, and we are today recording a podcast with Property Elite. The conversation we're going to be having today with the three of us branches on from a previous conversation that three of us had discussing equality, diversity and inclusion in the construction and property industry. And today we're going to be delving a little bit more into that and talking specifically about EDI and in the context of social mobility. And how that is affecting the industry that we're working in and what we can do to support that topic. It'd be great to go into some introductions. So Katie, would you like to start and to introduce yourself?
Yes, and thank you for having me on this podcast again. My name is Katie Corbett. I work at Bray and Slaughter. We're an SME construction management company based in South Bristol, working regionally, and I do the social value and diversity and inclusion. I'm also a member of the Women in Property Southwest Committee as the EDI champion, and I come with more of a sociology background.
Thank you. It's great to have you here. Karl, how about you?
Hello, good morning. My name is Karl Brown, and I'm a commercial property partner in the Bristol office of national law firm Clarke Willmott. I'm very passionate about social mobility and also ED&I, and so I'm also the founder of an initiative called the Bristol Property Inclusion Charter, which I launched in 2019 to boost diversity and inclusion in the Bristol property sector. And alongside that, I'm also a social mobility ambassador for the Law Society of England and Wales. And like Katie, thank you for having me on this podcast.
It's fantastic to have you both here. So it's a quick intro to who I am. Obviously, you both know me. I'm Abigail Blumzon. I'm a consultant at Property Elite, and I have been for just over 6 years now. I am also one of the directors at Bailey Partnership, who are a construction consultancy firm who do have a Bristol office. Although I don't work in our Bristol office, I'm in our Chichester team. And I'm the chair of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee for Bailey Partnership. So it's a topic that's also incredibly close to my heart. I'm always looking at kind of what are we doing as a firm, what are we doing as an industry, and how can we do better both for the people who are working in the industry, the people in our organisations, and also just for our communities at large. So I'm going to jump straight in. We obviously often hear the term social mobility used in corporate circles, but I'd be really interested to know what it actually means to you personally, and also to understand why you feel that it should be a priority for the property and construction industry specifically. Karl, do you want to jump in?
Absolutely. Well, social mobility is very personal to me. So I'm the child of Windrush era parents who came to this country from Jamaica in the 1960s. And it's really looking at their example of starting from very modest, humble backgrounds. My dad became a plasterer and my mum became a nurse, and seeing how through their hard work and dedication, they really gave their children a better start in life than they themselves enjoyed. So yeah, that really inspired me not only to try and succeed in my own career, but also to make sure that other people from less privileged backgrounds and young people also have that opportunity to advance themselves. And I think this is critical, not just for the property industry, but also all industries, because it's my passionate belief that you only get the best performing industry and the best performing leaders if you have that diversity of thought and perspectives.
I could not agree more. Katie, it'd be really interested to hear your take on it as well.
Yes, social mobility is obviously, to myself and the business that I work in, very important. As a social value manager, I do a lot of interaction in local schools, especially around South Bristol. And it's been very eye-opening going in and speaking to a lot of young people, and they have such a lack of awareness that there are jobs out there that are available to them that they could have careers in, and also jobs within the construction and property industry they've just never heard of before. So I'm really passionate and love going into schools and talking about all the different careers they can do, and hopefully just making them a bit more curious, and have the confidence as well. I think that's a key thing I've picked up on with a lot of the work that I've done, is the soft skills development and that confidence gap in young people as well.
Yeah, I think it's so enormously important. And I think something you said, Karl, is well, actually something you both touched on there, is so important. Like, a lot of people just I feel like the construction industry doesn't often talk enough about the kind of jobs that are available. And it's so difficult for people who perhaps don't already have connections in the industry or know people who are working in the industry to understand what is even possible. And so as an industry, we could be missing out on kind of like amazing, incredibly talented staff, because often you're just not looking at an entire talent pool. And then for society as a whole, it's kind of so important to give those opportunities to anyone who wants them. Yeah, I think it's also important. So obviously, I think all three of us can agree. It's very much kind of a lot of this is about doing the right thing. And it is the kind of ethical, equitable thing to do. I mean, Karl, from your side, what do you feel that we're missing out on as an industry when we're not kind of bridging that gap between kind of what roles are available, what opportunities there are, and those people who are perhaps from less privileged backgrounds?
I really think that the property industry is missing out on a massive potential pool of talent, if it's not managing to engage or reach out to all young persons from various communities and different backgrounds, particularly those from less privileged backgrounds. And so we've all heard in the news or seen in the news, certainly up until recently, that there's a quote war for talent in terms of recruits, and lots of industries, including property, have reported shortages or problems in trying to get sufficient recruitment. And so I think by trying to ensure that we reach out to those persons from less privileged backgrounds, it would definitely assist that. And then secondly, just following up from a point which I alluded to earlier, to my mind, the best decision making and the best leadership happens when you've got not just a group of people from the same background and same mindset, but when you've actually got a diverse range of perspectives and viewpoints. And that helps not just in terms of trying to reach out to customers. So for property industry, for example, obviously sells to the wider public in terms of things like residential homes. And so it's great if you can have a range of perspectives, but also in terms of risk points and opportunities. Again, I think it's absolutely critical if you've got that range of perspectives at ground level and in the boardroom.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And ultimately, like, as a kind of construction and property industry, we end up in this kind of really kind of unique role where we, as a group of people in the industry, are basically shaping how the built environment like looks and how it operates and how it can be used for people who are not in the industry. And that's everything from kind of how property is maintained, how safety is managed, how kind of communications with residents happen, how buildings are built and designed in the first place. And I often kind of think about this from, I do a huge amount of facade remediation, kind of post-Grenfell safety work in buildings. And so much of the conversations around kind of the Grenfell tragedy and what happened was around how residents were communicated with in that building. And a lot of that was from kind of socioeconomic pools and kind of different groups of people. And it is challenging when you're having communication kind of styles which perhaps kind of, people in that industry are not understanding the challenges that certain groups of people are facing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really sort of flags a point that you've got to try and know or build up a picture of your end users, definitely in relation to residential developments. And if you've got that range of perspectives within your company at ground level and in the board level, then you've got a far better chance of having that knowledge of your end users and so what will actually meet their purposes, as opposed to just a sort of a group think, which doesn't really take that into account.
No, completely. So, Katie, do you think there's anything that's kind of unique about the Bristol property landscape in particular that makes social mobility a particularly urgent conversation at the moment?
Yes, I've got some data here from a presentation from Bristol Works that I went to earlier in the year for their Future Ready programme, and it stuck with me since then, and it's been a point of conversation with colleagues. So they've done a bit of survey, and in their research it shows that in Bristol there's 555 16 to 18-year-olds who are not in education, employment or training. And so that's 5.7% of 16 to 18-year-olds.
Oh,
and
my
they've also, it's a big statistic. So 219 of those students are in South Bristol, which is predominantly, it's where I live and work and the schools that I go to mainly. But they've also found a correlation between students who are persistently absent between year 7 and 11. So it's 16.14% of students who are. So it's 3,722 students. Of that, 2,363 are above eligible for the free school meals. So there's been research into low socioeconomic backgrounds and school attendance and how that then impacts being in education, employment or training once they reach 16.
Oh, wow. So kind of supporting social mobility in that context and kind of supporting and providing those opportunities, letting people know what opportunities are out there is so incredibly important. Those are some incredible statistics.
Yeah, it's a brilliant slide that I'll be happy to share afterwards, and the work that they're doing as Bristol Works, mainly within the council, are absolutely brilliant at connecting employers to local schools and giving students that experience of speaking to employers and developing soft skills and confidence and awareness of careers. But in terms of the Bristol picture, it is a real predominant issue that needs to be addressed by everyone collaboratively.
What are, and this is a huge question, but with that in mind, what are you seeing actually kind of happening that is working at the moment?
I think from my own experience going into schools, I'm always excited when someone goes, oh, I'm really interested in construction, but most of the time they're saying electrician because my dad's an electrician, or a carpenter. It's mainly trade jobs, and there's incredible salary potential and it's a really good career to get into. But most of the time I'm finding they're not often aware of different jobs that they can get into, or apprenticeships in site management or quantity surveying, something that may traditionally be deemed as a white collar or university job. A lot of the time I'm finding young people aren't quite aware of the pathway they have to that career.
Yes, I did think about a line I used in a talk probably about a decade ago, where I spoke at a sustainability and social sustainability conference about women in construction. And one of the lines I kept coming back to is the fact that you can't be what you can't see. And I think there is, like you referenced there, people kind of looking at particular career paths because it's something that their parents do, or because it's something that they've seen family members do or family friends do. It's so difficult to know what jobs are even possible to do. And often, I think it's very easy for children and for young people to get into the mindset of like, that's for them, but it's not for me. If you're seeing people from like a certain socioeconomic group or kind of who are just a certain way or from a very different background to you doing a particular career, to think that's not something that is set out for my world. And it's such a difficult problem to have.
Yeah, and I think it links in a lot with social capital and the access to careers and support that young people may be able to get from family members, whether or not that's researching careers or different university applications or help with their CV, that confidence to aspire to different careers that they might not know of beforehand, or someone who doesn't have that advantage is aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. So Carl, I know we've touched on quite a lot of barriers there. But what are some of the kind of real practical barriers that you are seeing in the work that you do?
Yeah, and I'd completely echo some of the data which Katie was discussing then, because I'm Bristol born and bred, and I'm very proud to be Bristolian. But I've always been conscious that Bristol, despite being one of the best performing economic cities outside London in the UK, has always been a city of two halves. And it's always been slightly startling, as Katie alluded, that you've got swathes of Bristol, particularly, for example, parts of South Bristol, which don't seem to have completely missed out on some of the economic benefits and opportunities that industries or sectors such as property have been generating. And so some of the things and initiatives that we've got to do to try and resolve this is going into schools. It's also one of the impediments that there can be for people from certain parts of Bristol, particularly young people, can be transport costs. It may seem that if you live in certain parts of South Bristol, which theoretically are quite close to the city centre of Bristol, the city areas of Bristol, that it should be relatively straightforward for young people to actually go to those areas, for example, to access work experience opportunities. But when you speak to some young people from those areas, they've often said that one of the things that impedes or inhibits them from considering those type of opportunities is that they just think it's too far away, that they actually haven't physically been out of their local area much at all in their lifetimes. And so it's that then gets into making sure that there's sufficient affordable public transport, which is, I know, something which First Bus and the council obviously have to coordinate between them both. And it also means that if there's potential opportunities for students to experience, such as the Bristol Property Foundation class, which Katie and I will be attending next Tuesday, that you have students actually be given free transport. So for that particular class that we're holding next Tuesday, we're going to be hosting students from Bridge Learning Campus, which is based in Hartcliffe, but those students are actually going to have access to a free coach or bus so that they can actually physically get from their local area to the host venue, which will be the University of the West of England. So it's just trying to consider that as part of your initiatives. And just last point, I think one of the other things which Katie was mentioning, which is important, is that there's nothing wrong in young people wanting to, for example, follow into the same trades or jobs that their parents do. But it is about trying to provide informed information to those students so that they're informed of a range of opportunities available to them. And that's something, again, which we try and do with the Bristol Property Foundation class in respect of the range of careers involved in the property industry. And in addition, sometimes my experience has been that it's not just about informing and convincing the young people themselves of the potential opportunities, but also making the case where possible and feasible, whether it's you directly or whether it's a school, to their parents. so that their parents also buy in that there's potential opportunities for their children.
Oh, there's so much to unpack there, Karl. There's some really, really interesting points. And like in particular, when you spoke about with kind of like transport and locations of careers, really resonated with me, because it's an area that I've always been really conscious over my career that I had a huge amount of privilege in. My original degree was architecture, and I was really lucky that when I was initially thinking about the fact I wanted to go into that career, my parents would drive me to the unpaid internships that I could do. And I could afford to take on unpaid internships because I lived under my parents' roof, and I didn't have to be worrying about kind of, do I need to take on a job that is helping me contribute towards like my own income and my own rent. And then I could afford to take on kind of a fairly low paid internship, which involved moving halfway across the country, because my family backed me in the career, and I had definitely a financial safety net that was a risk that I was able to take. But that takes such an enormous amount of this kind of like ingrained privilege that I wasn't able to take those risks and have that support. But the location one is so important. And actually, I think I mentioned this the other day, but we've just moved our Bristol office from kind of the outskirts of Bristol into the city centre. And accessibility of the office was such a massive factor in that decision. Like the office was kind of set up in the place it was for a kind of wide variety of commercial reasons. Ultimately, it precluded anyone who wasn't able to take public transport, whether that was for who wasn't able to drive, whether that was for kind of financial reasons, or whether it was for kind of just a personal preference, or whether it was because of any reasons to do with accessibility. It just made the office location completely inaccessible. And so moving it to a city centre location was such an important decision to make sure that we kind of open ourselves up and kind of at the talent pool is there, really, and just help move those barriers to entry that come from that blocker like transport. And what you were talking about as well, about kind of companies supporting the cost of transport for particular events. It's such an amazing, such an important initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it was a conscious decision when I was putting together the idea of a Bristol Property Foundation class, initially with Bristol Works and the University of the West of England as partners, but now over the last couple of years also with the support of the Bristol Property Agents Association, that we consider having a mixture of going into local schools, holding the class there so that we're close to where the students are based, but also giving students the opportunity to actually get out of their classrooms and actually experience what it might be like at one of our top local universities, and making sure that in trying to facilitate that it would be affordable for the school, which often has budget constraints of itself, and also the students themselves, to make sure that they would have that free access to free transport, to be able to just experience what it's like at a great venue like the University of West England.
Amazing. So we've talked a lot about the initial, almost kind of attracting talent and making sure that we can try and, as an industry, find ways to engage people and find ways to kind of, I suppose, open the doors to letting people know those careers are there, and starting to reduce some barriers to being aware of what exists and starting to have the ability to explore options. And there's some amazing, really important stuff. I must be honest, the transport piece hadn't really even occurred to me, but that is huge. And it sounds, now that you've said it, so incredibly obvious, the way of removing those barriers to entry, to letting people kind of have the ability to explore those careers. So do you think it's something that you see as well, an importance of not getting people in the door in the first place, but actually making sure that people stay in those industries? How much more a barrier are you finding retention?
Katie, do you want to go first?
Sorry, I should have flagged that question. just for me.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I was just trying to get my head around it.
Oh, sorry. So loads of that conversation was about kind of recruitment and getting the right people in the room to start with. But I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on retention and kind of what we can do to make sure that people actually stay and thrive.
Yes. Quickly before going on to retention, I think I've been to a panel discussion before around social mobility and interviewing for jobs, encouraging people from low economic social backgrounds into the industry and to apply themselves to interview and go for any career that they dream of doing. An important part of that is the interview process for companies. If you have a very corporate environment, which people from privileged backgrounds who's got a lot of work experience and family friends that work in these places, they're automatically going to have a lot of confidence to go to these interviews and feel as though they fit into that environment. I think it's really important to work with schools and give them mock interview practice, to make loads of young people, to give them the experience. I did mock interviews recently where a young person at the end of it, when I said, do you have any questions for me? They said, yeah, what's the point of this? And I explained to them, well, it's great that you've got the confidence to come in and do this interview, but think of everyone in your class. Do they have that opportunity or confidence to go sit in front of an employer and tell them their strengths and their weaknesses and why they should be hired? So making sure the interview process is really accessible and straightforward for people to enter into a company. And then retention. Good company benefits is always a huge plus. If it's transport costs, having good open communication with your line manager to support your staff in whatever support they may need to come to work and bring the best version of themselves and feel supported. As we've touched on earlier, to not have groupthink and to have diverse voices and perspectives in meeting rooms drives innovation. So it's really important to make sure your whole workforce is able to come to work and be supported and
And helping people feel that they kind of actually belong from the start. So not just kind of getting that diverse talent into the office, into the companies and into different careers, but actually having people kind of feel like they aren't othered, feeling like they are, it's just one team and there's no kind of divide from there.
Yeah, I think it's really important. A phrase that really keeps in my mind, it's not just about surviving, but thriving. And I think in order to thrive, one of the things that can often be useful is, for example, mentoring. So just having that more experienced mentor able to guide that person from a less privileged background around not necessarily the nuts and bolts of their job, but navigating how the company works, what's expected of you, even things that some people might take for granted, such as client networking. If you're from that less privileged or underrepresented background, then experience in networking can often be alien to you when you're starting off. So I think mentoring is absolutely critical. And also, in addition, if they're going to be thriving, then one of the things that we also need to bear in mind is that quite often they have what's called a fee earning role. So they're having to generate fees to obviously look at the chances of progression. And so companies and firms need to make sure that there's fair allocation of work to all of their recruits, etc., to enable all of those recruits the same or similar opportunities to generate fees and to thrive and to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that last aspect of it is huge. So making sure that people are kind of thriving and kind of have a pathway to leadership, as opposed to just kind of, well, great, you're in the door. It's that what next? And also this kind of, I know we talk quite a lot, and we talked quite a lot in the last time the three of us spoke, about the importance of representation in the industry. But that will then provide a pathway to showing that representation. And so ideally, this is something that almost becomes kind of, it's a self-supporting piece of work. And the more we kind of have that diversity of, obviously we're kind of focusing more on the social mobility side of things here, but diversity kind of across the board, across all characteristics and backgrounds, the more that supports future recruitment and future retention and having the right people in the room to be able to make informed decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the only way that you're ultimately going to be able to build that pool of talent from diverse backgrounds, from which future leaders will then be drawn from. So you do need to build up that pool of talent, because otherwise what all that will happen will be great. You sort of have success at entry level in terms of getting persons from less privileged backgrounds or underrepresented backgrounds. But if that all then falls away after a year or two of those persons being in the industry, then you're then having to go back full circle to try and get that recruitment correct again, and so on. Whereas if you get that recruitment correct, if you build up that pool of talent, then you hopefully move towards what I call the virtuous circle, where essentially you've got that pool of talent, they're feeding into senior leadership levels. Young people from less privileged backgrounds see persons like themselves in those leadership positions, so they're more inspired to go for the jobs, and so on. So it just ends up being more of a virtuous circle, as opposed to having to start over again repeatedly every year or 2 years.
Yeah, completely that. You phrased that much better than I did in my very clumsily phrased question. But yes, a virtuous circle is such a great way of thinking about it. And I think sometimes, particularly where you have that kind of virtuous circle isn't in full flow yet, I guess, like standard office cultures and ways of working, whether that's kind of office-based work and many other things, can become inadvertently quite exclusionary. And often that's not through, or probably almost entirely, that it's not through anything intentional, but it is just fully inadvertent. You're kind of setting up these cultures, perhaps you don't have a native understanding of kind of what needs do need to be met. Katie, it'd be interesting to hear from you on any practical changes you feel that firms can put in place to make internal environments kind of, I suppose, less exclusionary in a way that would then boost retention for people who may not come from, or kind of people who may come from a wide range of backgrounds.
I think it's really important to use any sort of media, whether that's the company website, LinkedIn, community notice boards, any way where you can channel to people from various backgrounds that it's a company who supports people, whether or not that is putting policies online. So carers or parents can see that they'll be supported if they need to go pick their child up from school, or if their child is ill for a long period of time, or support them with nursery or school drop-off and pickups. Being vocal in the office. I know it's really important when leadership are vocal about going and doing a school pickup. I definitely think it's important to come from leadership and to shout about all the positive things you're doing, so people can see themselves fitting into that company if they were to research you.
I find that so incredibly important. And it's definitely something that I've tried to do a lot of as I've become more senior in the firm and more senior in the industry, just kind of being very open about kind of how I navigate my kind of roles as a parent and my role as a director in the firm, and kind of being open about the fact that I'm kind of, I need to stop meetings at this time because I need to go and pick up my children. And then this is when I'll be picking up my laptop again, and kind of talking about those challenges and just trying to encourage openness in those conversations so that kind of people do feel that that's something that isn't a conversation that has to be excluded from the room or excluded from a workplace.
Yeah, I think as well, having staff social events which are inclusive to everyone as well. And there's an old centric of all socials just being around a pub or drinking and a lot of pressure. And there's people who, for many reasons, don't drink. And just making sure that everyone within the company feels included in those activities as well.
I think it's really important.
Encouraging people to stay in companies and want to apply.
Yeah, completely. This is quite a big question, and I don't expect there to be one answer. So it'd be interesting to hear from both of you. Karl, perhaps you first, on where you feel the kind of responsibility might lie from this. Like, who owns this? Is this firms? Is it people in leadership? Is it institutions? Is this something that's kind of the responsibility of individuals?
My answer to that would be that it's a responsibility of various stakeholders. So the national government, I think, has to have a stake in this, because ultimately the more productivity, etc., and talent that you get into the economy will help the national economy. It's local authorities, and it's where you can. Obviously, as a parent, you've got I'm a parent myself, so you always try and hope for the best for your particular child or children and give them the best start possible. And it's a responsibility of businesses, and I think the business world, all it can do is just try to put in as many as many initiatives as it can to play its maximum part in this. The business world alone can't solve it, but it can try and do its best by having these initiatives of reaching out and also making sure that once it gets recruits in, that they've got the best opportunity to advance in those companies and getting the messaging correct, getting, as Katie alluded earlier, leadership giving out the right signals and messaging and support as well. So it's various stakeholders, but it is incumbent upon the business world, and in this case the property industry, to try and maximize all of the levers that it possibly can.
Amazing. Completely agree. And I think you are right. There's a very big role that that kind of government and local authorities have to support this as well. It's very. There's no one single point of responsibility. This is such a point for kind of everyone to come together and drive the change that we need. Katie, sorry, carry on.
I was just jumping in to answer the questions. Yes, I completely agree with everything Karl has said, especially in an industry where we're very vocal about the skill shortage, but it's important to make sure we're all doing our part to tackle that and go into schools and encourage people into the industry, and that it is a place that they can be supported. I'm also working on the EqualX pilot, which West of England Combined Authority are one of the local authorities taking part, and it's with the Career and Enterprise Company. And it's about modern work experience and what that will look like going forward from year 7 to 9, particularly about introducing careers and employer engagement visits for young people. And it's been a great venture so far because it is all about collaboration, not just an employer putting on a week's worth of work experience and then maybe getting some feedback afterwards, but having collaborative meetings with the teacher beforehand to understand more about what the students should cover, what they need exposure to, and what they might be interested in individually as well. So it is moving in a positive direction with collaboration between local authorities and industry partnerships, like Karl has mentioned earlier on, with BPAA, the Inclusion Charter, the local university, Bristol Works. Yeah, very, very important. Sorry, my train of thought just went there. I think one of the issues that's still coming up, even though there's a big push from the government for modern work experience and more engagement throughout year 7 to 11 for young people, is there's still a bit of struggle with funding, and that question around cost does come up quite a lot, which will be challenging for not just young people and their schools, but also some businesses and what they can offer.
There's some amazing content there. So obviously we've kind of got through loads of different kind of sides of this. A question that I've got for you both, and Karl, perhaps you could go first with this one, is if a firm was asked for advice on one change that they could make to start supporting social mobility better and kind of move in the right direction, where would you recommend that they started?
I would recommend that they start by hearing the viewpoints of the communities that they're trying to reach out to. Actually, I mean, we've all got our own different perspectives as to what works and what doesn't work, but actually listening is particularly in this day and age, probably an undervalued or undersold skill. So I think actually listening and finding out from those particular communities as to what their perceptions are, what any additional barriers that they think there are would be a good place to start. And sometimes I know in the business world, everyone, including myself, we're all very busy and in our own little worlds. And so this is where I think it's important to, if you haven't got the time capacity or the connections, maybe looking to connect up with some of the, whether it's Bristol Works or social enterprises who do have those connections with those local communities, just so that you can get those viewpoints, and then that will actually inform your policies and also what you try and construct as potential solutions.
I think it's such an important point to make, and very much this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, because every community that we are living in and working in is going to have its own diverse social mix, and you have diverse and very, very unique needs, drivers, and societal factors. But ultimately, taking a step back and looking at what are the challenges of the societies that we are kind of recruiting staff from or carrying out our projects in, is a really important step before starting to look at what we actually then do as a business to support change in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the only way this will work will be, it's going back to the word collaboration. If it's not just a collaboration within the property industry, so we've got great collaboration in Bristol, I'm pleased to say, between initiatives such as the Bristol Property Inclusion Charter, Katie's Women in Property Southwest, Bristol Property Agents Association, and the Forum for the Built Environment, Great Western Branch. But it's not just having that industry collaboration, but also making sure that we've got that collaboration with the communities themselves, whether that's via local career services such as Bristol Works and or via social enterprises as well.
Completely. Katie, this is where I'd be interested to have your input as well, in terms of where you think would be kind of the best place, even as Clarke is kind of stepping back from the police into the community to understand the challenges, where you'd advise companies to start.
Yeah, I think Karl's covered it really well, actually, and I don't know how many times I'll I'm almost sales pitching Bristol works to people. But in terms of, we're very fortunate in Bristol in terms of collaboration between employers and also the local council skills and employment department. I think sometimes it can be quite daunting if you don't have a lot of time or resource or experience working with young people and trying to do your bit for social mobility and encouraging people into the industry. And that's where services like Bristol Works are brilliant, or most schools will have career leads that you can email into, and having maybe an hour bite size of doing speed networking or a workshop and getting an understanding of what it is like to work with young people. And also they can help you plan a workshop as well. You're not completely on your own. Another thing is maybe don't always accept that first work experience request email that comes in, or such and such friend's son is interested in engineering, which is brilliant, but they've got the network to give them that opportunity. It's really important to just contact a local school who you think might have students who experience disadvantage and open that application to them to see if they're interested in that opportunity as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. There's so much I want to go and do now. I found this really inspiring. But actually, one of the things that I was going to touch on earlier, and we didn't, was just about how much of this industry does still run on kind of that factor of who you know. And I think, like you say, taking a step back and not just accepting the first work experience applications and kind of reaching further before then is a really important thing to do. So just as some kind of closing, for both of you, what would meaningful progress look like in 5 years from now? Katie, do you want to take this one first?
In 5 years from now, I would love to go to another kind of local industry or Bristol Works event, and the statistics have been decreased dramatically, that a lot of young people are no longer not in education, employment or training, and are more educated about the different careers available to them, the different pathways, and have that aspiration and opportunity to apply for them.
Amazing. I think that's a really interesting answer, because often it's I find people can find it very challenging to measure the success of initiatives in the sphere of equality, diversity and inclusion. But actually that is such a direct and tangible measure that, like, have these metrics improved? Has employment outcomes improved? Do we have less unemployment in these spheres and more employment kind of in construction and property from that?
We've got great statistics as a city to now use as a benchmark and do everything we can together, for sure.
What an amazing kind of point of advocacy for the importance of, like, starting with baseline data, right? Like, it's really hard to kind of manage something that you cannot measure. But starting with the baseline of, well, like, this is where we are now, and improvements of that, improvements kind of from that baseline can then be can be measured and be quantified, and we can learn from those successes. What an amazing place to be starting.
And learn from each other as well. Sorry, and learn from each other as well, and work together to achieve that. Because we're all pitching for the same team, aren't we? Wanting to achieve the same goal.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like there should be absolutely no, like, corporate secrets when it comes to managing inclusion. Like, we should be shouting about it. We should be having more cross-company forums talking about what we're doing and what we're learning and how we can kind of help learn from each other. And Karl, how about from your side? What do you feel that meaningful progress would look like 5 years from now?
Well, I'd actually like to build on the data point that yourself and Katie were mentioning just a few moments ago. And I'd like to see data showing that the pool of people making it to mid-level in the property industry is, sort of more socially inclusive as well, and that there's a greater range of those who, for example, went to secondary comprehensive schools, or started from families who maybe had free school meals or something along those lines. And this is data which I know a lot of companies and organisations are capable of gathering together to measure just basically what the composition of their workforce is. So for me, I'd be really keen. I always take I want immediate success, but I fully also acknowledge that sometimes you've got to take a long-term perspective of these things and realise that it's not all going to be resolved at the click of a finger. But certainly if in 5 years' time or a bit over that, we've got a pool of persons at mid-level who are from that sort of broader range of background, who are then going to be the pool from which our future leaders are from, then that for me will be a big step towards achieving that virtuous circle that I mentioned earlier.
That's really good points. And actually, I've just made myself a note because we've started doing kind of regular diversity questionnaires amongst our staff that are kind of fully anonymous, just with the intent of kind of gathering data about who we are employing as a practice so that we can better and understand the direction of movement, understand where we are as a kind of body of people as a baseline to then be able to support people better and develop better initiatives. And actually, what you have said there has made me realise that I don't think we have questions in there that are tracking questions around social mobility. So understanding kind of what are kind of stuff like free school meals and kind of where your family background is in terms of kind of education history and so on. So I've made myself a note. That's something that really should be included the next time that we think about that questionnaire stuff, because it is such an important thing to be keeping track of so that we understand what we're doing right and where we could do better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a big believer in getting as much data as possible. I mean, obviously, I appreciate that there's going to be a feasibility point about how much data you can actually take on. But I'm a firm advocate of not just gathering data about gender, race, disability, religion, but also getting data about social mobility as well, or just tracking how that's progressing. And that's definitely something which I know some firms have been trying to improve upon, but definitely it's something which we can definitely build on to make sure that we have that tracker.
Very much so. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you both. Is there anything in closing that either of you feel that you'd like to mention, anything you feel that you've not touched on yet?
No, I think I've covered everything. Just really that, just to sort of reiterate that improving social mobility, it's not just a moral issue, but it's something which is fundamental to the success of the property industry, and I'd actually even go further, fundamental to the success of UK PLC, because we're now in an increasingly competitive world, and we're only going to compete as a country in this competitive world if we draw from all our talent pools.
Yeah, and if this is something that we get right as an industry, the implications for the industry, for individuals, for societies and communities, and like you say, for the country as a whole, are so incredibly wide.
And I think just to reiterate on something Karl had mentioned earlier, is when approaching this as a business, to look at it through an intersectional lens at every opportunity, because there's going to be a lot of people who have another protective characteristic on top of coming from a low economic background as well, and how else you can support them and be aware of the barriers they might also face.
Thanks for listening to this week's Property Elite podcast. Head to our website to check out the full blog, and here you will find free and paid support resources and services. We offer a free consultation for every single RICS APC and Associate RICS candidate, or you can ask us any questions you have via the online chat. See you next week.